MLB Network continues their Top 10 Right Now series, looking at the top 10 third baseman in the game. So I'm going to bring you my list, but I want to hear from you baseball fans down in the comment section below who makes your top 10 third baseman right now. So let's get into it. Now, coming in at number 10 is the third baseman now for the Houston Astros, Isaac Paredes. There's no doubt about it when you look at what this player has been. He's been one of the more consistent bats over the past couple of seasons, mostly playing through the Tampa Bay organization. When you look at what he is capable of, this is a guy who absolutely is going to play big in that ballpark in Houston. Being able to pull the ball is his absolute forte when it comes to the offensive side of the game for Isaac. And those short porch left field seats there with the Crawford boxes, or whatever they're going to be called now, is going to be something where he's going to find himself playing extremely well. I think that the biggest downfall for Isaac Paredes is going to be what he does on the defensive side of the baseball, but a league average third baseman is going to be what you absolutely are looking for when you get this level of power threat from this player. I think that offensively he is going to head into that Houston Astros lineup and be one of the more consistent forces in the game for them going into the 2025 season. There's little doubt that there's going to be a lot of changeover in the roster for the American League West this offseason, and Paredes is one of those changes. But when it comes to Houston trying to regain their form atop of this AL West division, Isaac is going to be one of the biggest components for their success. And that's why he makes number 10 on my list. Now, as we get into number 9, it is the Los Angeles Dodgers, Max Muncy. Muncy is a guy who is an absolute force in their lineup. Again, one of the biggest factors in terms of success in Major League Baseball. One of the biggest abilities is durability and availability. Muncy has been plagued by injuries throughout the course of his tenure with the Dodgers, but nevertheless, this has been one of the better bats for them. And when you look at what the 2025 team is going to be trying to do, trying to repeat and be the first repeat champ since the 99-2000 New York Yankees, Muncy is going to be a big piece of what they do in 2025. If Muncy can prove that he is healthy, and like Isaac Paredes that we just mentioned, being a league average defender is going to be something that allows the Dodgers to really be able to maximize his talents. While league average may sound like a knock, that is not. It's not a dirty word in this game. But when you look at what he is able to do, as long as he's not costing you runs on the defensive side, what he gives you offensively is going to be a huge boost to the lineup. Obviously, when it comes to Muncy, this is a guy who's going to hit towards the middle to lower half of the Dodgers order, given all of the firepower that they have in that lineup. And he is one of the pieces that brings that firepower. So there's no doubt when you look at the 2025 Los Angeles Dodgers roster, having Max Muncy in that lineup is a tremendous addition to the squad. There's no doubt, looking at the 2025 campaign, Muncy is going to be one of the better third basemen in the game. Obviously, it is going to be all predicated on his health, but a healthy Max Muncy is going to be, without question in my mind, a top 10 third baseman right now. Now, as we get into number 8 on my list, it is a young player who, in my opinion, is going to absolutely blossom in 2025, and it is Jordan Westburg of the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles have an extremely young lineup, and it is going to be predicated on these young players advancing and progressing in their career, how well Baltimore does in 2025. But to me, Jordan Westburg is going to be one of the better bats coming out of that Baltimore team. And when you look at what he is going to be capable of compared to some of the other third basemen in the game today, there's no doubt that this young player is going to continue to progress, in my opinion, in a big way for Baltimore. Having a player this young, still developing, but already having shown signs of greatness is something that Baltimore fans and Orioles fans can absolutely look forward to in 2025. There's a young core there that has been built up through the position player side, and it gives me feelings and comps very reminiscent to that 2016 Cubs team that ended up winning the World Series. Now, I'm not saying that Westburg is going to be the next coming of Chris Bryant, but there's going to be a feeling in Baltimore that this this is a player who you can absolutely bank on. Having that young core of position players is going to be something that Baltimore is absolutely going to love in 2025. And Jordan Westburg, to me, is going to be one of the players that is the most highly valued. And that's why he makes number 8 on my list. Now, as we get into number 7, it is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful bats in the third base market, and that is Eugenio Suarez. And when you look at what Suarez is capable of doing for the Diamondbacks, this is a guy who provides a level of consistency and dependability that you just love to be able to bank on. This is a guy who's capable of hitting you 40-plus bombs on a yearly basis. And when you have that level of power threat inside of your lineup day in and day out, knowing that at any point you can get a massive 3-run home run from this player that just is a game-changing type of player, that's exactly what Eugenio Suarez is capable of providing. When you look at what he does on a day in and day out basis, watching what he does, the way he goes about his craft of hitting, there's no doubt this is a guy who you absolutely would love to have in your lineup on a nightly basis. The Diamondbacks get to have that player built into that middle of that order, and he provides them with a level of power that you absolutely want to see. There's no doubt that there are going to be some questions about his defensive ability, much like a couple of the other players on this list, but a league average defender is something that he is capable of being, in my opinion, maybe slightly better at this point in his career. But what you get from him offensively is going to be that potent power threat, and that is what you look for out of a power position like third base. Now, as we get into number 6, it is the man currently without a home, Alex Bregman. At the time of this recording, Bregman has not yet signed a contract with any team, but he has likely been replaced by Isaac Paredes in Houston. So when you look at what this player is capable of doing, this is a guy who's consistent on both sides of the baseball. Yes, there are some questions as to what he can be going forward. We've seen a guy of his similar style, his similar level of play in Dustin Pedroia kind of wear down and get worn and torn throughout the second half of his career. So what can be expected from Alex Bregman? I think a lot is going to ride on what he does next season. And in 2025, to me, he is still one of the best players in the third base market. Looking at what he is capable of doing on both sides of the baseball, this is a guy who is a talented defender and someone that you, in a pinch, could move over to shortstop, move over to second base. He has that kind of versatility. And when you look at what he does on the offensive side of the baseball, yes, he's not the same level of player as he was during those questionable years with some trash can incidents. But this is a guy who offensively over the last several years has still been a solid bat that can play in the top half to middle of your order. When you look at what Bregman is, and you put together what his career could be, this is a guy who absolutely can benefit teams on a nightly basis on both sides of the baseball. Yes, there were some questions as far as injury concern with his throwing ability in the 2024 campaign, but I think that those issues and those injury issues are behind him, and 2025 is going to see him get back to being a all-star caliber player and even potentially push him back towards the MVP level player that we saw years ago. There's no doubt that this is a player who can be a bit controversial in terms of how he kind of approaches the game, but if you're looking for a guy who you can rely on, who's going to be a good clubhouse presence, this is the player that you want in that lineup. Now, as we get into number 5 on my list, it is the Boston Red Sox Rafael Devers. When you look at what Devers is, this is an offensive force and someone who can be one of the best hitters in all of Major League Baseball. Now, obviously, there is a huge discrepancy in what he is capable of doing defensively. There is a huge liability there, in my opinion, when it comes to his defensive ability. But what he does on the offensive side of the game is without question some of the best hitting ability in the game. Over the last several years, though, working with Alex Cora, he's become a much better defender. And when you put those two aspects together, from what he is on the offensive side with improving on the defensive side, you absolutely have a player that requires a top 5 finish in terms of third baseman in the game today. Devers is amongst a lot of conversation, at least this offseason, as to moving positions and moving off of third base. But as long as he remains in that hot corner for the Boston Red Sox, this is a guy who absolutely finishes in the upper echelon. For me, Rafael Devers is a little bit lesser of a defender in terms of what we have coming up on the list, and that's why he ends up at number 5. As we get into number 4, it is Matt Chapman of the San Francisco Giants. One of the best defensive third basemen in the game today, and what he's been able to do offensively over the past couple of seasons has been get to be one of the better players in the third base market. When you look at what this player is going to be for the 2025 campaign, this was a player the Giants locked up very quickly after bringing him over on a 1-year deal, and they were able to find common ground and allow him to kind of relax and be able to play at a level that we've seen him be able to play before. Without question, being under the tutelage of Bob Melvin is a big-time help to Matt Chapman. We've seen it before during his time with the Athletics, and this is a guy who, when consistently hitting, has some of the best range and ability defensively, and that's what you want. You want that combination of tremendous defense paired with very good to tremendous level offense, and Matt Chapman is capable of providing that, and that's why, for me, he is number 4 on my list. Now, as we get to number 3 on my list, it is one of my favorite players in the game today, and it is Manny Machado of the San Diego Padres. I really debated and had a hard time with this top 2, number 2 and number 3 players, as I went back and forth between Manny and our number 2 player, which we'll get to in just a moment. But when you look at what Manny does on a year in and year out basis, this is a player that you would absolutely love to have in your dugout each and every single night. Defensively, one of the greatest third basemen in the history of the game, in my opinion. His range, his arm strength, just the smoothness with which he plays the position is unheralded. Obviously, you have comps with Nolan Arenado, who I really wanted to put on this list, but I just couldn't find the room this year, and I think he's going to have a bounce-back year, so mark my words on Nolan Arenado. 2025 is going to be a bounce-back in a big way. But for when it comes to Manny Machado, this is a guy who is absolutely one of the smoothest players at third base. You also pair him with the fact that this is a guy who can come up really clutch in a big at-bat and give you that extra oomph that you need out of the lineup. I think that for Manny Machado, the 2025 season is going to be another year where he approaches that MVP caliber season. We've seen him finish in the top 5 a couple of times, and I think that this is going to be a guy who really pushes his name and pushes his level to another echelon in 2025. As we get to number 2 on my list, it is Austin Riley of the Atlanta Braves. Riley is a guy who offensively is one of the best talents in baseball. And I think that for the 2025 season, they're going to try to erase all of 2024. Injuries plagued the Braves in a big way in 2024, and Riley was one of those guys that suffered an injury stint. But I think that when you look at what he is able to do, this is a guy who is a 30 and 100 type of a player with slightly above average defense. This is a guy who allows you as a Braves fan to really just relax when he comes up to the plate, knowing that he is going to be a productive player for you night in and night out. Watching what he does in this lineup for the Atlanta Braves is provide a consistent level of impact and threat. And when you look at what he does on a nightly basis, this is a guy you would love to have on your team to be a foundational core piece. And that's what he provides for Braves fans. And going into the 2025 season, I think a healthy Austin Riley is going to be a guy who puts himself right back into that conversation amongst the upper echelon. We've seen him finish number 1 in the MLB Network top 10 third baseman rankings before. And I think that in 2025, he can push himself back to that upper echelon level. But for me, in 2025, I think he lands at number 2. Now, there's very little question for me, and this was one of the easier positions for me to decide. Number 1, it is the almost perennially underrated MVP candidate, Jose Ramirez of the Cleveland Guardians. Ramirez is a guy who you can say is underrated or not underrated, given where you think that he lands and how much baseball fans absolutely love his talent year in and year out. But there's no question that he is often overlooked amongst the upper echelon of players in the game today, whether you believe he's underrated or not. In my opinion, Jose Ramirez has the makings of what you would want as a five-tool player. This is a guy who plays tremendous defense. This is a guy who runs the bases very well, who's a switch hitter. He hits for average. He hits for power. This is a guy who you can plug in and you know year in and year out you're going to get the utmost from him. You're going to get a consistent level of play on both sides of the ball. This is a guy who you don't hear complain. This is a guy who goes out there, does his job to an extremely high level year in and year out. It is almost an absolute travesty that he has not yet won a Most Valuable Player award, given how consistent and how good he has been for a plethora of years. There's no doubt in my mind that this is a guy who can finish number one in terms of MVP with what he is capable of doing. In 2024, we saw him nearly have a 40-40-40 season with home runs, steals, and doubles. But we are going to see a player that is absolutely going to play, in my opinion, with a chip on his shoulder in 2025 to be able to make up for the lost game, because I believe that if he had that extra game that they did not play against the Astros, he would have achieved that 40-40-40 season. But there's no doubt Jose Ramirez, for me, is the number one third baseman in the game. But I want to hear from you, baseball fans. Let me know your thoughts, your feelings down in the comment section below. Who makes your top 10 third baseman right now? Is there anyone that you felt like I left off the list that should have been on? Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments. As always, you can find me on social media and on X at banter_baseball, or everywhere else at Baseball Banter Broadcast. Make sure you keep it locked in by hitting the subscribe button and the bell for post notifications here on this YouTube channel, as we have a ton of new content that is in the works for you this season, and we have some exciting information that is going to be happening and exciting news that is coming very shortly. So make sure you keep it locked in to this YouTube channel, as there's some fun stuff coming up for the 2025 season. So I want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace.